at the same time, I mentioned before this very likely escalation into, there's already been a lot of, back and forth between Israel and Hezbollah. The whole northern part of Israel has been evacuated because of those ongoing fighting intentions. Well, this was extraordinary yesterday. You can put this up on the screen. So Hezbollah released drone footage showing sensitive, key Israeli positions. We're talking chemical and oil storages. Most of this is around the port of Haifa. It appeared to show, according to a news report, parts of a factory belonging to a defense maker, including Iron Dome batteries, rocket engine depots, David's slingshot facilities, and radar. So this basically a provocation, Emily, by Hezbollah saying look, we're able to get our drones in here in spite of your Iron Dome systems and take a look at all of your sensitive positions. And if we can get our drones in there and get this kind of video, you can imagine what sort of military capabilities we would have as well. This comes as the Israelis are also projecting. They're saying they have operational plans in place. They are very much threatening a wider escalation. We can put this up on the screen. So this is from The Guardian. Israeli foreign minister says decision on all-out war against Hezbollah is near. Sign-off on planning for a Lebanon offensive follows release of Hezbollah drone footage of Haifa in northern Israel. Let me read you a little bit of this. So Israel Katz, who is Israel's foreign affairs minister, he said in a post on Twitter that after those threats, quote, we are getting very close to the moment of deciding on changing the rules of the game against Hezbollah and Lebanon. In an all-out war, Hezbollah will be destroyed and Lebanon will be severely beaten. Israel's military later said operational plans for an offensive in Lebanon were approved and validated, and decisions were taken on the continuation of increasing the readiness of troops in the field. At the same time, we could put the next piece up on the screen. You did have a senior Biden advisor, although I don't know how senior this dude is. I've literally never heard of him. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein met with Netanyahu and Gallant. Part of the whole reason this dude was there to just try to head off a war with Hezbollah. And once again, Emily, while he's there, literally for the purpose of trying to avoid war with Hezbollah, Israel is basically announcing their plans for war with Hezbollah. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and it's actually an interesting, it's an interesting sort of split screen with what's happening in Rafah, because what we hear a lot of hawkish folks in Israel and outside Israel say is that they're surrounded by vicious enemies. And we can get into, the deeper conversation about why that is, but it is true. And that means innocent people's lives are very much hanging in the balance. And it's sort of unfortunate. The bridges that Israel has, in some cases over the course of just the last couple months, not fully burned, to the point that you were making earlier. They basically are still getting what they want from rubber stamps from the Biden administration, but the sort of moral credibility that has been, with a lot of people who are involved in the negotiations, whether they're in the Biden administration or in the broader West, and diplomacy and all of that, now wanting to stave off, as we were just talking about Amos Hochstein, not a person I'd heard of either, great name, as he's trying to stave off the war. I have to imagine that these conversations are a lot more difficult, and any effort to prevent suffering of innocence is a lot more difficult because of some of this just wildly unnecessary prosecution of the war.
Well, the Israeli public does not support the direction of Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, we're hearing more and more family members of hostages coming out and saying, Bibi Netanyahu is one of the key obstacles to the return of the hostages, which of course he's used the hostages rhetorically, as a political weapon to justify continuing the war. But the hostage families themselves, many of them at least, see very clearly that, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand the majority of the hostages were released through ceasefire negotiations. And Bibi Netanyahu, Benny Gantz, former war cabinet member, came out and said this directly, that he was not interested. He was doing everything he could to undermine those potential negotiations. Now, I'm not taking, Hamas's role out of this whatsoever, but always from the U.S. focus, these are the people that we are funding, that we are supporting, that we are backing unconditionally. And obviously, first and foremost, the actions have been devastating to the civilian population in Gaza, devastating to Gaza in general. The levels of hunger, the level of annihilation, the reconstruction after whenever this is over is going to be years and years and years. It's just insane. The level of complete destruction and devastation that we're talking about here. So that's first and foremost. But even from an Israeli political domestic security perspective, the decisions are incredibly foolish and very self-serving. And yet, if you were a real friend to Israel, if Biden really was a true friend to Israel, sometimes you have to tell your friends difficult things, and you have to also, if you're the world superpower, hold them to account. And so the whole direction has been incredibly foolish, incredibly short-sighted from the Biden side. I think it's really damaging from the Israeli side. And now we're faced with, another potential escalation, which I'm sure the Israelis have every interest in dragging us directly into that. Will Biden resist that when he hasn't resisted anything else that the Israelis have wanted us to do? I think everyone should be very concerned about that. And Hezbollah is a serious adversary. I mean, they have a lot more weaponry and are a lot more serious militarily than Hamas ever could dream of being. They also had no involvement on October 7th. And the core of this conflict right now between Israel and Hezbollah is all about Israel's assault in Gaza. That's the core of the problem there. It's the core of the problem with, the Houthis, with Iran. Of course, Israel had that dramatic provocation of attacking the Iranian embassy. So once again, we are at a precipice of potential escalation and increased chaos here in the context of this conflict.
And it's worth noting the video we started the segment talking about, the Netanyahu video sort of that the United States government is reacting to. He mentions Iran. He went out of his way really to cast the war as really one, and this is in his ability to, in his attempt to persuade the United States or to even shame the United States into being more fully supportive, which is a high bar. Obviously, he mentions that he casts this war as one that's really ultimately against Iran. And we're having this conversation after Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un just had a pretty warm meeting. And it's not hawkish or warmongering, just to note how fragile the geopolitical ecosystem is right now. And so Netanyahu, Hezbollah, a war potentially with Hezbollah, Netanyahu talking in those terms about Iran. There's a hot war happening right now in Ukraine that the media seems to have suddenly forgotten about. So it's just, I think ultimately the way that Netanyahu has gone about this war, whether it ultimately makes Americans more safe, whether it ultimately makes Israelis more safe, is genuinely an open question. But an open question maybe. I mean, I personally don't think the answer to that question is yes. But we'll still see the scale of how this continues to escalate, because it's not de-escalating. That much is very clear at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. And, Bibi wants to wait on Biden. He's hoping, just like he hoped that Obama would get beat by Romney, he's hoping that Biden will get beaten by Trump. And, that's the other thing that's just incredible to me is even just from a petty political standpoint, this guy is not your ally. He doesn't want you to be in office. Yeah. He's trying to knife you and undermine you at every possible point. And just even from a very human, narrow, petty, self-interested perspective, you are unwilling, unable to do anything about it. So just, more of the same of what we've been seeing, I think, since October 7th at this point.
Yeah, Lebanon is the place to watch going forward, sadly, looking like another escalation. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.